That day was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life. I stood there in my graduation gown, searching for my parents in the crowd. But the seats were empty. They said they had no time. Hours later, I saw them smiling at my cousin's party. That betrayal burned deep, but it also lit a fire inside me. Today, I stand here not as someone broken, but as someone stronger, ready to share my story of pain, strength, and ultimate revenge. When I think back to my graduation day, the memory that haunts me most is not the ceremony itself, not the sea of graduates in identical gowns, and not even the moment I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. What haunts me most is the empty seat. That one glaring, vacant chair where my parents were supposed to be. Every graduate had been told they could bring their family, and for weeks I imagined my parents sitting proudly in the audience, clapping, smiling, maybe even tearing up as they watched me close a chapter of my life and step into a new one. But when the moment came, and my eyes scanned the crowd, that seat remained painfully untouched, as though it had been reserved for someone who never cared enough to show. I remember the morning of that day so clearly. I had tried to hide my excitement from them because they had already given me subtle hints that attending wasn't a priority. I told myself not to expect too much, but deep inside, I clung to hope. I thought, surely, they'll be there. They'll see how hard I've worked. They'll understand how much this means to me. I woke up early, ironed my gown with trembling hands, and rehearsed what I would say to them after the ceremony. I imagined hugging them, taking family pictures, and finally feeling like they were proud. That fantasy carried me through the morning, giving me the strength to believe in something that never happened. As I arrived at the venue, the atmosphere was electric. Families poured in with flowers, cameras, and cheers. Mothers rushed to straighten their child's cap, fathers adjusted ties, and siblings laughed as they teased each other about who would cry first. I walked in alone, clutching my program, my eyes darting from row to row. My heart skipped every time I saw an empty chair, only to watch it fill moments later with someone else's loved one. Then I found the spot where my parents should have been. The ushers had left it open, expecting them to show. For a while, I stared at that space, convincing myself they were just late. Maybe traffic had delayed them. Maybe they were stuck at the entrance, waiting for parking. I told myself stories to cover the sting, but the longer I waited, the harder it was to keep lying to myself. The ceremony began, and the applause of other families filled the air like a chorus of love and support. Every name that was called echoed with cheers, whistles, and shouts of pride. I sat among my classmates, smiling on the outside, but hollow within. My name was printed in the program, the diploma was ready with my signature, and my years of effort had all built toward this day. But when I walked across the stage, the applause that followed me was generic, not the personalized cheer of parents who knew the weight of my journey. I kept my smile tight, my head high, but the truth was I felt invisible. That empty seat followed me in my mind, louder than any applause. The emptiness wasn't just physical. It represented something deeper. That chair symbolized the years I had worked late nights, studied until my eyes blurred, sacrificed my social life, and pushed through every obstacle. I had imagined that my parents would finally see all those sacrifices materialize into something tangible, something undeniable. I wanted them to know I wasn't just a child asking for attention, I was an achiever, someone worthy of recognition. Yet in that crucial moment, when acknowledgement would have meant everything, they weren't there. They had chosen absence over presence, silence over support. As I looked around, I noticed the tears in other parents' eyes. I watched as mothers waved proudly at their children from the stands. Fathers stood tall, recording the moment with shaky hands because of how emotional they were. Younger siblings held up handmade posters with glitter and bold letters spelling "Congrats." Those sights cut me like a knife. It wasn't jealousy, it was the realization of what I had been denied. I couldn't stop comparing their warmth to the cold, empty void where my parents should have been. Every cheer reminded me of the silence that echoed from their absence. The strangest part was the duality of my feelings. On one side, I was proud of myself. I knew what I had accomplished. I knew the value of my achievement. On the other side, I felt cheated, like the validation I had waited for had been ripped away. I wanted to scream into that empty chair, to demand answers, to force it to fill itself with the people who had promised to care for me since the day I was born. But no matter how long I stared at it, the chair stayed stubbornly vacant, mocking me with its indifference. Even after the ceremony ended and graduates rushed to reunite with their families, that empty seat haunted me. My classmates disappeared into groups of hugs and photo sessions. The courtyard filled with laughter, camera flashes, and flower bouquets. I stood still, diploma in hand, waiting, hoping, foolishly expecting someone to tap me on the shoulder and say, "We're here." Instead, I stood alone, invisible in a sea of celebration. The empty seat might as well have followed me out of the auditorium, whispering with every step, reminding me that I had been left alone on the day I needed them most. When they told me they couldn't come to my graduation, they used the simplest excuse, 2 words that carried the weight of dismissal: no time. Those words echoed in my head in a way that made me question everything. How could they not have time? This was a day that came once in a lifetime, a day marked on calendars for months, a day every parent usually circles with excitement. Yet for them, it was brushed aside as though my achievement were nothing more than a minor errand they couldn't fit into their busy schedule. I replayed their words again and again, hoping maybe I had misunderstood, hoping maybe there was some hidden reason that would make it all less cruel. But no, they said it bluntly, without hesitation, and without the slightest sense of guilt. I remember the moment clearly. I was in the living room, clutching the invitation card that the school had given me. I had been holding onto it for days, waiting for the right moment to hand it to them. When I finally gathered the courage, I slid it across the table, expecting at least a small smile or a nod of approval. They barely looked at it. My father glanced at the date and sighed as if it were an inconvenience. My mother shook her head gently, already flipping through her phone as though she had somewhere else more important to be. Then came those words, sharp and dismissive: no time. Not even an explanation, not even a half-hearted attempt to soften the blow. Just cold rejection delivered with casual indifference. For a while, I sat there in silence, not knowing how to respond. A storm of emotions built up inside me. Anger, disappointment, and confusion all wrestled for dominance. I wanted to demand answers, to ask them why they never seemed to have time for me when they had time for so many other things. But the words caught in my throat. I didn't want to beg for their presence. I wanted them to want to be there on their own. That was the part that hurt the most, not just their absence, but their lack of desire to be present. As the days inched closer to graduation, their excuse began to eat at me. I watched them go about their daily lives, attending dinners with friends, spending hours on the phone with relatives, planning outings, and laughing at trivial things. They had time for everything else, but not for me. I noticed how easily they rearranged their schedules when it came to other people, how effortlessly they made space for events that, in comparison, felt insignificant. Yet for my graduation, the day that represented years of hard work and sacrifice, they had no space, no effort, no interest. The hypocrisy stung more than the excuse itself. I began to question what no time really meant. Did it mean they didn't value me? Did it mean my achievements didn't matter in their eyes? Or did it mean that I was never a priority, no matter what I accomplished? These thoughts haunted me late at night when the house was quiet. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could so easily disregard something so monumental in my life. No time became more than an excuse. It became a statement, a verdict on how little space I occupied in their world. On the morning of the graduation, I still clung to a sliver of hope. I thought maybe they would change their minds at the last moment. Maybe they would surprise me by showing up after all. I left the house in silence, waiting for them to stop me at the door and say they'd decided to come. But the silence stretched on. They went about their morning as if it were just another ordinary day. I realized then that no time wasn't just words, it was a decision, a conscious choice to turn away from me when I needed them most. At the ceremony, their excuse weighed heavily on me. Every time I looked around and saw parents cheering, clapping, and taking pictures, I couldn't help but remember those 2 words. It was as though I carried them on my shoulders, heavier than the gown I wore, heavier than the diploma I held. Those words echoed in my ears with every name announced, with every cheer that wasn't for me. They were louder than the applause, louder than the music, louder than the announcements. No time. The emptiness of those words screamed louder than any absence ever could. Later, when I found out where they had actually been, the excuse turned into a knife that twisted deeper. No time hadn't been the truth, it was just a mask, a cover for choices they didn't want to explain. They had time, plenty of it, but just not for me. They used those words to make me feel like it was circumstances, like it was unavoidable, but in reality, it was preference. They chose not to show up. They chose to give their time to someone else, somewhere else, and left me with the hollow lie of being too busy. That realization made no time transform into something uglier: rejection, betrayal, and abandonment disguised as practicality. Even now, whenever I hear someone casually say they have no time, I feel that sting all over again. For most people, it's just an excuse, a way to brush something off. But for me, it is tied to that one memory, that one day when the people I trusted most used those words as a shield to hide the truth. It was never about not having time, it was about not caring enough to make it. And that is something I will never forget. The pain of betrayal doesn't strike in one single blow. It builds slowly, piece by piece, as small realizations pile up and the truth becomes impossible to ignore. That's exactly what happened to me around my graduation. It wasn't just that my parents didn't show up. It wasn't just that they said they had no time. It was the deeper meaning behind it, the silent message that my dreams, my milestones, and my hard work weren't worth their attention. That was the betrayal that cut the deepest, not the absence itself, but the revelation that I mattered less than the things they chose over me. I had always grown up believing that family was supposed to be your safe place, the people who clapped the loudest even when the world stayed silent. I believed that no matter how distant we sometimes felt, on important days we would stand together. Graduation was one of those days I thought was untouchable, a moment too significant to be ignored. But when the day arrived and their seats remained empty, something inside me cracked. It felt like a betrayal not just of the moment, but of the years that led up to it. They weren't just absent that day, they had erased themselves from the story of my struggle and triumph. Betrayal feels sharp because it comes from the people you least expect it from. If it had been anyone else, maybe it wouldn't have mattered as much. If a friend hadn't shown up, I could have shrugged it off. If a relative had forgotten, I could have excused it. But this was different. These were the people who were supposed to be there by default, the people who were supposed to love me without conditions. And yet, when it came down to it, they chose something else. That choice echoed in my heart louder than their excuse ever could. What made the pain worse was the contrast. All around me, I saw parents who showed up with flowers, balloons, and wide smiles. I saw families crowding around graduates, proud tears streaming down their faces. Their pride was loud and clear, and it painted my parents' absence in sharper colors. I couldn't help comparing myself to my classmates who basked in the glow of their family's love. It wasn't jealousy, it was grief. I was grieving the presents I didn't have, grieving the celebration that was rightfully mine but had been stolen by indifference. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It sat heavy in my chest, it ached in my stomach, and it made the entire day feel incomplete. Betrayal also lingers. It doesn't end when the moment passes. The image of that empty seat replayed in my mind over and over. It was like a wound that wouldn't close, reopening every time I thought about it. I would lie awake at night thinking about how many times I had defended them in my own head, how many times I had convinced myself they loved me even if they didn't say it often. Graduation proved me wrong. Their absence was a silent confession that my hope had been misplaced. That realization stung in a way no words could describe. I remember looking at my diploma that night after the ceremony and feeling conflicted. It was proof of my success, proof of the years of dedication I had poured into my education. But it also became a reminder of their betrayal. Every time I looked at it, I thought of the way they weren't there to witness me holding it for the first time. I thought about how they weren't the ones to cheer when my name was called. The diploma should have been a source of pure pride, but it became tangled with disappointment, like a prize that had been tainted by the people who should have been the first to celebrate it. The betrayal reached even deeper when I discovered what they had really been doing instead. They weren't stuck at work or dealing with an emergency. They had chosen to attend someone else's celebration, someone else's event, as if my day could be brushed aside like it was unimportant. That choice revealed everything. It told me I wasn't a priority, that in their eyes my achievement could be replaced, substituted, overlooked. That knowledge burned worse than the excuse. It transformed the absence from a misunderstanding into a conscious act, and that was the sharpest betrayal of all. It's strange how betrayal leaves behind scars that shape the way you see the world. After that day, I found myself doubting promises more easily, questioning words that were meant to reassure me. When someone said they cared, I silently asked myself if they truly did, or if it was just another mask hiding disappointment to come. The betrayal planted seeds of mistrust that grew quietly in the corners of my mind. It made me colder, more cautious, less willing to believe in people's intentions. But above all, what hurt the most was the betrayal of love. I had always told myself that, even if they weren't the most expressive, even if they didn't say the words often, deep down they must care. Graduation proved otherwise. Love isn't just spoken, it's shown in moments when it matters. Their absence told me everything I didn't want to believe. It told me that when I needed them to prove their love, they turned away. That was the betrayal that pierced deepest, the betrayal that left me standing alone on a day I should have been surrounded by pride and support. Discovering the truth at the party was like ripping open a wound that I had been trying to bandage with excuses. For days before graduation, I had convinced myself that my parents' words, "no time," were genuine. I told myself they were busy with commitments they couldn't break, that life had simply gotten in the way. I tried to dull the sting of their absence with logic, but deep down I knew something didn't add up. Parents make time for moments like this. They rearrange schedules, cancel meetings, and move mountains to be there. So when whispers started trickling back to me about where they had actually gone, the fragile wall of excuses I had built collapsed instantly. The truth wasn't that they didn't have time. The truth was that they chose to spend their time elsewhere. I found out through a photo first. Someone casually posted pictures from a family gathering on social media, and in one of them, there they were, my parents, smiling, laughing, plates full of food, standing in the middle of my cousin's party. The image burned into me with a sharpness that no words could match. They hadn't just skipped my graduation, they had replaced it with a celebration that didn't even belong to them. It was as if they had exchanged my milestone for a moment that meant nothing in comparison. That photograph spoke louder than any excuse they could have given me. It told me their absence wasn't an accident or an unfortunate clash of schedules. It was a deliberate choice, and one that betrayed everything I had hoped for. At first, I stared at the photo in disbelief. My mind scrambled for explanations, reaching for anything that could soften the blow. Maybe the picture was old. Maybe it had been taken before my ceremony started. Maybe they planned to come afterward. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. The decorations in the background matched that very day, the timestamp proved the timing, and the smiles on their faces proved their priorities. They weren't struggling to make ends meet, they weren't trapped in traffic, they weren't dealing with an emergency. They were celebrating with someone else while I stood on stage, alone, waiting for a cheer that never came. The betrayal deepened when I learned how enthusiastic they had been about attending the party. Relatives later told me how my parents had been talking about it for days, discussing what gifts to bring, what clothes to wear, and how excited they were to be there. That realization cut sharper than anything else. They hadn't forgotten my graduation, they had ignored it. They had consciously weighed their options and decided that a casual party mattered more than their child's once-in-a-lifetime achievement. It wasn't neglect born of distraction, it was neglect born of choice. That choice seared itself into me like a brand. I replayed my graduation in my head alongside the images of them at the party, and the contrast was unbearable. While I was walking across the stage, clutching the diploma I had worked years for, they were clinking glasses, laughing at jokes, and posing for group pictures. While I scanned the crowd, desperately searching for their faces, they were smiling for a camera somewhere else. While my classmates hugged their families and basked in their pride, my parents were too busy congratulating someone else. It was a cruel split screen that played over and over in my imagination, a reminder of where their loyalty really lay. Seeing them at that party also revealed a side of them I hadn't noticed before. The ease with which they blended into someone else's celebration, the joy they displayed for another person's milestone, showed me they weren't incapable of pride or joy. They just reserved it for others. They had the ability to show up, to laugh, to celebrate, but they chose not to show it for me. That was perhaps the hardest truth to swallow. It wasn't that they didn't know how to be supportive, it was that they didn't think I deserved it. The aftermath of discovering the truth was a storm inside me. Anger and sadness fought for dominance. Anger at their decision, sadness at the realization of what it meant. Every time I thought back to that photo, I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a reminder that my graduation would forever be linked to betrayal. The cap and gown, the stage, the diploma, all of it had been overshadowed by their choice to be somewhere else. What should have been a symbol of my success became a constant reminder of their absence and dishonesty. Even worse was the silence that followed. They never offered an explanation, never admitted where they had been, never tried to justify their choice. It was as if they thought I would never find out, or worse, as if they didn't care whether I knew or not. That silence spoke volumes. It told me that they didn't feel guilty, didn't see the need to apologize, and didn't recognize the weight of what they had done. To them, the party was harmless fun. To me, it was the moment that shattered my trust. The truth at the party wasn't just about where they had been. It was about what it revealed, about their priorities, about their view of me, about the role I played in their lives. It showed me that when it came to choosing between me and someone else, they didn't hesitate to choose the other option. It showed me that their loyalty was conditional, their support selective, and their pride something they could easily give away but never offer to me. It showed me that family doesn't always mean commitment, and parents don't always mean support. The party was just the setting, but the real truth I discovered was far heavier. I was never their priority. Turning hurt into motivation is not something that happens instantly. It's not as though the pain of betrayal suddenly transforms into strength overnight. At first, the hurt consumes you. It sits heavy in your chest, makes your thoughts restless, and forces you to replay moments again and again until they carve deep scars into your memory. That's how it began for me after my parents skipped my graduation. For weeks, I carried the weight of their absence like a shadow. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of what I had lost. Friends would show me pictures with their families at their ceremonies, and I would smile politely, pretending it didn't hurt, while inside I felt hollow. I kept thinking about that empty seat, about the words, "no time," about the photograph of them at the party. The pain was sharp, raw, and unrelenting. But as days turned into weeks, something inside me started to shift. I realized I had two choices. I could let the pain bury me, or I could use it to build something stronger. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Their absence didn't define my worth, it revealed theirs. It showed me that I could not depend on them for validation, that waiting for their approval was like waiting for rain in a drought. If I wanted to move forward, I had to stop seeking their applause and start creating my own. That realization didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me direction. It was the first spark of motivation born from the ashes of betrayal. I began to channel the anger I felt into determination. Instead of letting my parents' neglect weigh me down, I decided to let it fuel me. Every time I remembered their excuse, every time I thought about their choice to celebrate someone else instead of me, I told myself I would rise higher, go further, and prove to myself that I didn't need their presence to succeed. I would take the silence they gave me and turn it into a voice loud enough to drown out their absence. I would let my achievements speak for themselves, even if they never cared to witness them. This transformation didn't happen in a single moment. It happened gradually, through small acts of resilience. I threw myself into my studies and my goals with a new intensity. Late nights of work no longer felt like burdens. They felt like steps toward proving that I could thrive on my own. Every obstacle I faced became an opportunity to remind myself that I wasn't defined by the people who abandoned me. I learned to celebrate my victories, even if no one else did. A good grade, a completed project, a recognition from a teacher, each one became a personal triumph, proof that I was capable without needing anyone's approval. At times, the hurt would resurface, trying to drag me back into bitterness. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when I longed for the kind of support that seemed so effortless for others. But each time, I reminded myself that I had already survived the worst of it. If I could walk across that graduation stage alone, if I could endure the silence of their absence, then I could endure anything. That thought became my anchor. It turned the pain into resilience, and the resilience into ambition. Slowly, I began to see the strength that had been hidden inside me all along. Their betrayal had forced me to uncover it, to dig deeper than I ever thought I could. I realized I didn't just want to succeed for the sake of success. I wanted to succeed to prove to myself that their rejection didn't define me. I wanted to create a life so full, so powerful, that their absence would no longer matter. I wanted to make choices not out of spite, but out of a determination to rise above the pain they had caused. In a strange way, their betrayal became my greatest teacher. It taught me the value of independence, the importance of self-validation, and the strength of perseverance. It showed me that sometimes the people you expect to lift you up are the very ones who will push you down, and in those moments, you have to become your own support. I stopped waiting for apologies, stopped hoping for recognition, and started focusing on building the version of myself I had always dreamed of. That shift in mindset began to change everything. I no longer saw my parents' absence as a wound I had to hide. It became a reminder of why I fought so hard. Every setback I faced became fuel, every challenge a test of how far I had come. Instead of letting the pain consume me, I carried it like fire, letting it burn away my doubt and ignite my determination. Their neglect had hurt me deeply, but it also freed me from the chains of needing their approval. Turning hurt into motivation isn't about denying the pain. It's about acknowledging it, feeling it fully, and then choosing to rise from it instead of sinking under it. I took the hurt my parents gave me and decided it would not be the end of my story. Instead, it would be the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was no longer the abandoned child waiting for recognition, but the determined individual creating a future that no absence could diminish. My silent revenge was never about shouting, never about confrontation, never about proving a point in front of them with loud words or dramatic gestures. It was about building a life that spoke for itself, a life so undeniable that even in their silence, even in their absence, they would feel the weight of what they missed. Silence can be louder than anger, and that became my weapon. Instead of wasting my energy begging for their recognition or demanding explanations they would never give, I poured everything into myself, into creating something they could never take away from me. The first part of my revenge was emotional, teaching myself not to need them. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of wanting their approval, craving their attention, and waiting for their validation. Their absence on my graduation day shattered that illusion once and for all. I realized I could not keep handing them the power to define my worth. My revenge was in reclaiming that power, deciding that from that day forward, I would measure myself not by their standards, not by their indifference, but by my own. That choice was freeing. It was painful, yes, but liberating. Every time I remembered that empty seat, I reminded myself that my life's applause didn't need to come from them. The second part of my revenge was practical, success. I turned my energy toward building a path so strong, so visible, that their absence would forever haunt them. I dedicated myself to excelling in everything I touched, whether it was academics, work, or personal growth. I made sure every step I took was one they would eventually hear about, whether through relatives, neighbors, or the inevitable whispers of society. They might not have clapped for me at graduation, but I would make sure the world knew my name, and in that knowledge, they would be forced to confront the choice they made. My success became the mirror that reflected their failure back at them, not my failure to be worthy of love, but their failure to recognize worth when it was right in front of them. The third part of my revenge was in refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. When people betray you, they expect your anger, your begging, your tears. They expect to hold on to control through the wounds they've inflicted. I denied them that. I carried myself with strength in front of them, even when my heart ached in private. I never let them see the emptiness I felt on graduation day. I never asked them why they weren't there. That silence became my shield, because deep down I knew silence unsettles more than words. They may never admit it, but I know they wondered why I didn't ask, why I didn't cry, why I didn't demand their attention. My refusal to acknowledge their betrayal out loud became its own quiet punishment. Another part of my silent revenge was gratitude, but not toward them. I learned to find strength in the people who did show up for me, even if they weren't blood. Friends who cheered me on, mentors who believed in me, even strangers who recognized my effort. These became the pillars of my support. By embracing the love I found outside of my family, I proved to myself that I didn't need to depend on those who chose to abandon me. I found a new kind of family in loyalty, encouragement, and sincerity, and that discovery was revenge in itself. It showed me that the people I thought I couldn't live without were not as necessary as I once believed. Silent revenge also lived in my ability to rise above bitterness. I refused to let their betrayal harden me into someone resentful and angry. I took the pain they gave me and reshaped it into drive, into empathy for others who felt abandoned, into a determination to never treat people the way I had been treated. That choice, to become better instead of bitter, was the kind of revenge they could never anticipate. They might expect me to mirror their neglect, but instead, I became the opposite. I became proof that pain doesn't have to breed cruelty. It can inspire resilience, compassion, and strength. Every achievement I reached afterward became part of my silent revenge. Every award, every milestone, every step forward was a reminder that their absence had not stopped me. If anything, it had pushed me further. They might not have witnessed my walk across the graduation stage, but they would hear of everything that came after it. And when they did, they would be reminded of the moment they chose not to stand beside me. My silence turned into a haunting echo for them, a constant reminder of what they lost the right to celebrate. But perhaps the deepest layer of silent revenge was internal: peace. While they carried the weight of their decisions, I chose not to let it chain me forever. I stopped asking why and stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. My peace became my greatest act of defiance because it meant I had taken back control of the narrative. They may have skipped my graduation, but they did not get to skip the story of my life. They would always carry the knowledge of the day they weren't there, and I would always carry the knowledge that I thrived despite it. My silence was not weakness, it was strength. It was the calm after the storm, the unshakable resolve that no absence, no betrayal, no excuse could ever define me again.